Carlos C.J. Juarez had hauled cattle from Amarillo to San Antonio for 15 years, but nothing prepared him for Highway 281 after dark. The moon hid behind thick clouds, leaving the Texas panhandle swallowed by shadows. Dust devils spiraled across cracked asphalt, and barbed wire fences stretched into nothingness. His rig's headlights barely pierced the gloom. He flicked the CB radio, static crackling. "Anyone out there?" A garbled howl screeched through the speaker, too deep for coyotes. CJ slammed it off. "Just interference," he muttered, knuckles widening on the wheel. Earlier, at a greasy diner outside Wichita Falls, a waitress with nicotine-yellowed nails had slid his coffee across the counter. "Heard you're talking 281, she'd said, eyes narrowing. "Don't stop between midnight and 3 a.m. That's Hombre Lobo territory." CJ laughed. "The Wolfman? Seriously?" She didn't smile. "Ain't no joke. My cousin vanished there in '92. They found his truck, claw marks inside the cab. Now, as CJ passed a roadside shrine, crude crosses splintered by deep, parallel gashes, he shivered. Folks here sure love their ghost stories, he told himself. At 12:15 a.m., the trailer's rear tire blew. CJ cursed, pulling onto the shoulder. The cattle lowed nervously as he grabbed his flashlight and jack. The air felt thick, electric. Crickets had gone silent. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He froze. The sound echoed from the brush, claws on asphalt. A guttural snarl rippled through the night. The cattle erupted into frenzy, kicking metal walls. "Hell with this," CJ whispered, fumbling with the jack. His flashlight trembled, casting jagged shadows. Then he saw them, two amber eyes, glowing like furnace coals, 50 yards ahead. The creature stepped into the light. 7 feet tall. Wolf-like, but wrong, too narrow in the shoulders, too human in the stance. Matted fur clung to sinewy limbs, and its muzzle peeled back to reveal yellowed fangs. It sniffed, nostrils flaring, then let out a howl that shattered the silence. CJ dropped the jack, sprinting for the cab. The beast lunged, claws screeching against the trailer. He slammed the door, engine roaring to life. Thud. The creature slammed into the driver's side, its face pressing against the window, a grotesque mix of wolf and man, saliva streaking the glass. CJ floored the gas, tires spitting gravel. For 3 heartbeats, the beast kept pace, its breath fogging the mirror, then vanished. At dawn, CJ inspected the damage, 4-foot claw marks raked the trailer. Inside the cab, the stench of rot lingered. In Wichita Falls, a sun-leathered rancher eyed the marks and spat. "El Hombre Lobo, don't forget. You're lucky he wasn't hungry." CJ never drove 281 again. The clock on CJ's dashboard blinked 12:30 a.m. as his rig shuddered violently. A tire blew, of course it did. He cursed, steering the 18-wheeler onto the gravel shoulder. Outside, the Texas night was pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt alive. Cattle shifted restlessly in the trailer. "Just a flat. Easy fix," CJ muttered, though his gut churned. He grabbed his flashlight and tire jack, the beam slicing through the gloom. The air reeked of diesel and dry earth. As he knelt by the blown tire, the world went unnervingly quiet. No coyotes. No wind. Just his own ragged breath. Crunch. He froze. Gravel shifted nearby, like something heavy testing its weight. The cattle erupted, bawling, kicking the trailer walls. CJ's flashlight swung wildly. "Who's there?" he barked, voice trembling. A low growl answered, guttural and wet, vibrating in his ribs. It came from the brush 20 feet away. CJ's throat went dry. The flashlight trembled in his grip as he aimed it toward the sound. 2 amber eyes glowed back. Not animal. Not human. Something in between. The creature stepped forward, its silhouette towering over the mesquite. 7 feet tall, shoulders hunched, fur bristling like jagged shadows. Its muzzle wrinkled, revealing yellowed fangs slick with saliva. The eyes, God, the eyes, burned with primal hunger. CJ's legs turned to stone. The cattle screamed, their panic deafening. The beast cocked its head, nostrils flaring, as if savoring the fear. Move! Move! He lunged for the cab, dropping the jack. The creature snarled, claws tearing into the earth as it charged. CJ fumbled with the door handle, the stench of rot flooding his nostrils. Thwack! A claw swiped the trailer, metal screeching. CJ scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the door just as the beast slammed into it. The window cracked, webbing into a spider's nest of glass. The creature's muzzle pressed against the pane, hot breath fogging the surface. Its growl rattled CJ's bones. No, no. He twisted the key, the engine roaring to life. Tires spun, spewing gravel. The beast howled, a sound like a dying man's scream, and leaped onto the hood. Claws dug into the metal, peeling it like foil. CJ floored the accelerator, the rig lurching forward. For a heartbeat, the creature clung, those hellish eyes locked on his. Then it vanished. CJ didn't stop until sunrise. When he finally dared to check the trailer, 4 parallel gashes gleamed in the dawn light, deep enough to see steel. The cattle had gone silent. Back on the highway, a crumpled roadside sign read, Wichita Falls, 50 miles. He never made the delivery. The flashlight slipped from CJ's grip, clattering to the asphalt. His breath hitched as the creature stepped into the halo of the rig's headlights. It stood on 2 legs, taller than any man, its hunched silhouette warped and unnatural. Matted fur clung to its sinewy frame, patches missing to reveal scarred, grayish skin beneath. The face, God, the face, was a nightmare blend of wolf and human, an elongated muzzle crammed with jagged, yellowed teeth, but the brow ridge too pronounced, the amber eyes too intelligent. Saliva dripped from its jaws, sizzling where it hit the dirt. The beast sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. A low, rumbling growl rolled from its chest, vibrating in CJ's bones. The cattle erupted into frenzied bellows, slamming against the trailer walls. Easy, easy, CJ whispered, edging toward the cab. The creature's head snapped toward him. It lurched forward, claws, 6 inches long, curved like sickles, scraping the asphalt. CJ's blood turned to ice. Run! He sprinted, gravel biting through his boots. The creature let loose a howl that split the night, half animal shriek, half human wail. CJ dared a glance back, it was loping toward him, limbs jerking in a grotesque parody of a sprint. He yanked the cab door open. The creature lunged, claws gouging the trailer. Metal screamed. CJ scrambled inside, slamming the door just as the beast slammed into it. The window shattered, glass raining down. The creature's muzzle thrust through the gap, snapping wildly. Rancid breath flooded the cab, rotting meat and copper. CJ recoiled, fumbling for the ignition. Click. Click. No, start, damn you. The engine coughed to life. CJ stomped the gas. Tires spun, kicking up a storm of dirt and rock. The creature snarled, clawed hands gripping the doorframe, muscles rippling as it hauled itself onto the rig. CJ swerved violently, the trailer fishtailing. The beast lost its grip, tumbling into the darkness. In the rearview mirror, it scrambled upright, eyes blazing. But it didn't chase. It watched. CJ drove until the sun bled over the horizon. At a rest stop, he inspected the damage. 4 parallel claw marks tore through the trailer's steel siding, glistening with a sticky, tar-like substance. The cattle were silent now. Too silent. Inside the cab, the stench lingered. He'd never believed in monsters, not until tonight. CJ didn't stop until the sun clawed its way over the horizon, painting the plains in sickly gold. He pulled into a derelict gas station outside Wichita Falls, hands welded to the steering wheel. The cab reeked, a nauseating blend of rancid meat and burnt hair. He gagged, stumbling outside. The trailer told the story. 3 jagged grooves, 3 feet long, tore through the steel siding. Claw marks. Too precise for a bear, too deep for anything natural. A black, tar-like substance oozed from the gashes, shimmering faintly in the light. CJ touched it, his fingertips burned, the smell searing his nostrils. "Yainty the first," a voice rasped. An old rancher leaned against a rusted pump, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He spat tobacco, eyeing the marks. "El Hombre Lobo's been here since the Comanche Wars. Tribes used to leave offerings, deer hearts, tobacco, to keep it pacified." He chuckled darkly. "Now folks like you feed it something else." CJ's throat tightened. "Feed it what?" "Fear." The man tipped his hat and hobbled away. At a diner down the road, CJ scrubbed his hands raw in the bathroom, but the stench clung. He ordered coffee, his leg jittering under the table. A yellowed newspaper framed near the register caught his eye. The article detailed a trucker who disappeared after reporting a wolfman stalking his rig. His abandoned truck was found days later, the seats shredded, the cab reeking of decomposed flesh. No body. No suspects. CJ's coffee turned to acid in his stomach. That night, in a motel room that smelled of mildew and regret, CJ stared at the ceiling. The rancher's words looped in his mind. "Feeds on fear." Every creak of the floorboards, every coyote's yip, sent him bolt upright. At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed, an unknown number. A grainy photo loaded, his rig on Highway 281, the creature perched atop the trailer, its amber eyes glowing through the static. A text followed, "It remembers." CJ flung the phone across the room. Outside, a howl echoed, too close, too human. He packed his bags and fled. But weeks later, hauling produce through Kansas, he'd catch that stench again. Hear phantom growls in engine noise. See amber eyes in passing headlights. El Hombre Lobo didn't need claws to haunt him. CJ quit trucking 2 weeks after the incident. He took a job stocking shelves at a hardware store in Lubbock, far from Highway 281. But distance didn't matter. Every night, amber eyes burned behind his eyelids. Every diesel growl on the street made him flinch. He moved into a cramped apartment, its windows barred. Sleep became a battleground. In his dreams, the creature stalked him, not on the highway, but in mundane places, the store's fluorescent-lit aisles, his mother's kitchen, the church pews of his childhood. It never attacked. Just watched, its breath fogging his neck. Then, the package arrived. A plain manila envelope, postmarked from Wichita Falls. Inside, a grainy black and white photo. Security camera footage of his rig parked on Highway 281 that night. The creature crouched atop the trailer, its distorted face turned toward the lens. Claws dug into the metal, as if claiming territory. But the worst part was the eyes, glowing even in the grayscale, locked on CJ's cab. A note fluttered out, handwritten in jagged script. "It remembers you." CJ's coffee mug shattered on the floor. He backed into a corner, the photo trembling in his grip. How? Who took this? His phone rang, unknown number. He didn't answer. That night, he burned the photo in his sink. The flames hissed, emitting a sulfurous stench. But the image seared into his mind, the creature's knowing stare, its too human posture. "Feeds on fear," the rancher had said. CJ stopped sleeping. He boarded up his windows, bought a shotgun, and paced his apartment like a caged animal. At work, he jumped at the sound of squealing carts. Customers whispered about the crazy stalker, who muttered about wolves. One freezing dawn, he woke to a sound, a familiar scratch 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 at his front door. His breath froze. The security camera feed on his phone flickered to static. When he mustered the courage to check, he found no footprints. Only a dead jackrabbit on his doorstep, its ribs splayed open, heart missing. The next envelope arrived a week later. Empty, save for a dried, claw-shaped leaf stained with something dark. CJ didn't wait to see what came next. He packed a duffel bag, left town, and vanished into the backroads. But in diners and motels, he'd catch whispers, El Hombre Lobo's got a new favorite. Truckers swapped stories about a red-eyed shadow trailing rigs on Highway 281. CJ knew the truth. Monsters don't let go. Mia Torres tightened the straps on her kayak, the Texas sun baking her neck. Behind her, the Devil's River shimmered like liquid turquoise, its beauty almost mocking. The canyon walls loomed, ancient and indifferent, their limestone faces scarred with Comanche petroglyphs, spirals, wolves, and figures with too many limbs. "You sure about this?" her friend Jake asked, squinting at the water. Mia smirked. Scared of a little river? The ranger at the checkpoint hadn't been so casual. He'd leaned out of his booth, eyes shadowed under his hat, and said, "Respect the river. It's earned its name." His tone had been flat, like he was reciting a eulogy. Mia had laughed it off, but now, as the group paddled into the canyon, his words echoed in her head. They made camp on a narrow strip of sand, the cliffs pressing in like sentinels. Mia wandered off to gather firewood and found it, a weathered animal skull, half buried in the dirt. Its canines were too long, too sharp, curving like sabers. She turned it over in her hands, the bone cold despite the heat. "What's that?" Jake called. "Nothing," Mia said, tossing it aside. But the skull's empty sockets seemed to follow her as she walked away. That night, the fire crackled, casting long shadows on the canyon walls. The group laughed, swapping stories, but the laughter felt thin, forced. Then the howls started, distant, guttural, rising and falling in a rhythm that wasn't natural. "Coyotes," Jake said, but his voice wavered. Mia stared into the darkness, the firelight dancing in her eyes. The howls came again, closer this time, and she thought of the skull, its jagged teeth gleaming in the moonlight. The river whispered behind her, its currents swirling like secrets. By midday, the Devil's River had turned against them. Mia's GPS flickered, the screen dissolving into static. Jake's compass spun wildly, the needle twitching like a trapped insect. Even their phones were dead, the batteries drained despite being fully charged that morning. The canyon walls seemed to close in, the turquoise water now a sickly green under the overcast sky. "We're lost," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We're not lost," Mia snapped, though the map in her hands felt like a cruel joke. The landmarks didn't match, the river's curves twisting in ways she didn't remember. That night, the screams came. They weren't human, not quite. High-pitched, guttural, echoing off the cliffs like a chorus of the damned. Mia bolted upright, her heart hammering. The group scrambled from their tents, flashlights cutting through the darkness. "What the hell was that?" Jake demanded, his voice too loud, too sharp. They searched the campsite, beams of light dancing over rocks and brush. Nothing. But when they returned, the tents were slashed, fabric hanging in ribbons. Supplies were scattered, cans of food dented, water bottles leaking into the sand. "Mountain lion," Sarah said, clutching her flashlight like a weapon. Mia shook her head. "Mountain lions don't scream like that." The group argued, voices rising over the river's murmur. Jake wanted to leave, to backtrack while they still could. Sarah agreed, her eyes darting to the shadows. "We stay," Mia said, her tone brooking no argument. "We're safer together." But as the fire died to embers, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The canyon seemed to breathe around them, the howls fading into an unnatural silence. Somewhere in the dark, something moved. At dusk, Mia saw it. Perched on a cliff, silhouetted against the fading sun, was a figure, hunched, too tall, too wrong. Its snout was elongated, dog-like, but the eyes glowed green, like swamp fire. It tilted its head, studying her with a predator's calm. "There!" Mia shouted, pointing. The group turned, flashlights sweeping the cliff. But the creature was gone, vanishing into the shadows as if it had never been there. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Mia didn't answer. She couldn't. That night, Jake disappeared. They woke to his screams, short and sharp, cut off like a snapped wire. Mia scrambled from her tent, the flashlight trembling in her hand. Jake's sleeping bag was empty, his life jacket shredded, the fabric hanging in tatters. Paw prints surrounded the site, too large, too deep, with opposable thumbs that made Mia's stomach churn. "We're leaving," Sarah said, her voice shrill. "Now." They packed in a frenzy, tossing supplies into the kayaks. The river seemed darker, the current faster, as if it were alive and angry. Mia's hands shook as she grabbed her paddle, the memory of those green eyes burning in her mind. But the kayaks were ruined. Claw marks tore through the inflatable hulls, the gashes precise, deliberate. Mia stared at the damage, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The creature wasn't just hunting them, it was playing with them. "What do we do?" Sarah sobbed, clutching her arms. Mia didn't know. The canyon walls loomed, the petroglyphs seeming to leer in the moonlight. Somewhere in the darkness, a low growl rumbled, vibrating through the ground like a warning. The hunt had begun. The cave was a tomb. Mia and Sarah barricaded the entrance with rocks, their hands bleeding, breaths coming in ragged gasps. Outside, the creature paced, its claws scraping against stone. A low growl reverberated through the walls, shaking the ground beneath them. "Let me in." The voice was Jake's, but wrong, guttural, dripping with malice. Mia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Don't listen," she hissed. Sarah whimpered, her flashlight flickering over the cave walls. The beam caught something, petroglyphs, ancient and weathered. A wolf-headed figure loomed over stick-figure humans, its claws outstretched. Beneath it, a faded inscription, "It hungers for the lost." "What does that mean?" Sarah whispered. Mia didn't answer. The creature's growls grew louder, closer. The barricade shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. At dawn, the attack came. The rocks gave way, the creature bursting into the cave with a roar. Its green eyes burned like hellfire, its snout twisted into a snarl. Mia grabbed the flare gun, her hand steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Move," she screamed, shoving Sarah aside. The flare shot past the creature, striking the cave ceiling. Rocks rained down, the walls groaning as the canyon itself seemed to collapse. The creature howled, its body crushed under the weight of stone. Silence. Mia and Sarah crawled from the rubble, coughing, their ears ringing. The creature was gone, buried under tons of rock. But as they stumbled into the sunlight, Mia felt it, a prickling on the back of her neck, the sense of being watched. Somewhere in the canyon, a howl echoed. The rangers found them 2 days later. Mia and Sarah were huddled under a rocky overhang, their faces hollow, eyes haunted. Jake's shredded life jacket lay nearby, the fabric stiff with dried blood. The rangers called it a mountain lion attack, their voices too calm, too sure. Mia didn't argue. She knew the truth wouldn't fit in a report. In the hospital, a Comanche elder visited. His face was a map of wrinkles, his eyes ancient and knowing. He leaned close, his voice a whisper. The Devil's River has a guardian. You escaped, but it remembers your scent. Mia wanted to laugh, to scream, to demand answers. But the words stuck in her throat, heavy and cold. Months passed. Mia tried to forget, the howls, the glowing eyes, the cave. She moved into a small apartment in the city, far from the river. But the nightmares followed. She'd wake to the sound of scratching, her heart pounding, only to find nothing. Then, one night, it wasn't nothing. The scratching came again, louder this time, at her window. Mia froze, her breath fogging the glass. Outside, two green eyes glowed in the darkness, unblinking. She checked the security footage the next morning. The camera caught it, a shadowy figure, hunched and too tall, its claws dragging something down the hall. Mia zoomed in, her stomach twisting. It was Jake's life jacket. The screen flickered, the creature's eyes locking onto the camera. A low growl crackled through the speakers, and the footage cut to static. Mia sat in the silence, the elder's words echoing in her mind. It remembers.